She was just a simple village girl, raised on dusty footpaths in evening moonlight, where the loudest sound at night was the whistle of crickets. Amara had never known the rush of city streets or the glitter of tall buildings. She grew up carrying water from the stream, pounding yam beside her mother, and dreaming beneath the quiet skies of Umuoko. But everything changed the day she decided to test the life she had only heard about in stories, the life of the city. She stepped into that world with nothing but three dresses, old slippers, and a heart full of hope. What awaited her, however, was far from the paradise she imagined. And what she did next will leave you breathless. Let's get into it. The morning sun rose gently above Umuoko village, its golden rays sliding across clay huts and bouncing off rusted zinc roofs. Women were already at the stream, their laughter echoing between the tall palm trees. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and ripe mangoes, while goats wandered lazily around narrow footpaths. This was the world Amara knew. This was the life she understood. But deep inside her, a silent hunger had begun to grow. When her cousin Adaora returned from the city wearing sleek braids, polished nails, and a confidence that glittered like jewelry, Amara felt a stirring she could not ignore. Adaora spoke of malls with floors that shined like glass, buses that moved like magic, and restaurants where people ate food they never cooked. It felt unreal, yet irresistible. So, with her mother's reluctant blessing, Amara boarded a bus and left everything behind. The city swallowed her instantly. Towering buildings stretched toward the sky, cars raced past without mercy, and people moved as if chasing time. Amara held her small bag close, her heart pounding as she followed Adaora through the chaos. Every sound seemed louder, every scent sharper, every face unfamiliar. Days passed, and Amara tasted a new kind of life. She walked into shops colder than Harmattan mornings, touched clothes softer than anything she had ever known, and watched people dressed like characters in movies. At night, the city lights shone brighter than the stars she grew up admiring. But the longer she stayed, the more she felt something inside her fading. The city was beautiful, but it was also lonely. No one greeted her. No one cared where she came from. No one laughed the warm, genuine laughter she knew in the village. She missed the quiet evenings, the smell of her mother's soup, and the peace that wrapped around Umuoko like a blanket. Everything changed on the eighth night. Adaora took her to a loud apartment party filled with flashing lights and strangers. People laughed without joy, danced without rhythm, and drank without control. Amara watched Adaora slip into a dark corner with a man who handed her money. Money she begged for with desperation hidden behind makeup and fake smiles. The shock hit Amara like cold water. The glamorous city life her cousin bragged about was nothing but a mask. Behind the clothes, behind the nails, behind the flashy photos, Adaora was drowning. Amara walked out of the party, sat by the sidewalk, and let the night air fill her lungs. It was in that quiet moment that she understood the truth the city tried to hide. The life she wanted wasn't here. The next morning, without warning, she took the first bus back to Umuoko. Her mother cried when she saw her, thinking something terrible had happened. But Amara only smiled, hugged her tightly, and whispered that she had finally discovered where she belonged. From that day on, Amara poured her heart into her village. She joined the women's farming groups, taught younger girls, and began building a future shaped by love and strength, not confusion and false glamour. People respected her more than ever before. Even travelers passing through the village sought her wisdom. Amara became a symbol of truth, proof that sometimes you must leave home to understand why home matters. She had thought her journey ended the day she stepped back into Umuoko village, but destiny had only just begun to unfold. Amara returned with clarity in her heart, yet the world around her was shifting in ways she could not see. The same villagers who once admired her innocence now watched her with new eyes, some with pride, others with envy, and a few with quiet resentment. The early morning sun stretched across the farms, casting long shadows over the narrow footpaths as Amara joined the women at the stream. Buckets splashed, laughter echoed, and the scent of fresh river water mixed with the earthy smell of wet sand. It was the peace her spirit had longed for, the calm she couldn't find in the city. But beneath this tranquility, something unexpected was blooming. Young men began noticing her differently. Mothers whispered her name with admiration. Elders spoke of her as a girl who had seen the world and returned wiser than she left. But Amara paid no attention. Her heart was set on rebuilding herself, one quiet day at a time, until a stranger walked into the village. He arrived just before sunset, dusty, tired, and carrying a small leather bag. His presence caused murmurs among the villagers. His face was unfamiliar, his clothes slightly torn, and yet there was something unusual about him. Something reserved, something controlled. Amara was the first to help him. She offered him water, and as he drank, the fading sunlight revealed a scar across his forehead. His eyes held a mix of pain and pride, a story he wasn't ready to tell. The villagers gathered out of curiosity, but none came close. Only Amara dared. The stranger introduced himself as Chike. He said he was searching for work, for peace, for anywhere that would offer him a fresh beginning. But there was something in his voice, quiet, steady, almost practiced, that made Amara look a second time. The following days were strange. Chike worked hard, kept to himself, and avoided every form of trouble. Yet no one knew where he slept, where he came from, or why he had chosen a small village like Umuoko. Amara found herself watching him, not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity. Something about him reminded her of the city, of secrets hiding behind clean smiles, but she had no idea how deeply their paths would soon collide. One evening, as she returned from the farm, she saw Chike sitting alone under the old Udala tree. His head was bowed, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't notice her approach until she sat beside him. The moment their eyes met, she realized something. This was not just a tired stranger. There was a storm inside him. Before she could speak, loud footsteps filled the air. 3 men from the neighboring village marched toward them, their voices sharp, their eyes burning with accusation. They pointed at Chike. They called him a thief. They said he stole something valuable and escaped into Umuoko. The women fetching water nearby screamed. Children ran into their homes. The men of the village stepped out with anger in their eyes. And Amara, still seated under the Udala tree, felt her heart stop. Chike didn't run. He didn't deny it. He simply looked up, his eyes dim with a truth he could no longer hide. And what he revealed next would shake the entire village and Amara's world forever. The air grew thick around the Udala tree as the strangers closed in. The evening sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with deep orange streaks, but no one admired its beauty. All eyes were locked on Chike, the man who had walked into the village like a ghost and now stood accused like a criminal. Amara felt her pulse racing as she rose slowly to her feet, her fingers trembling. The men shouted, claiming Chike had stolen something that did not belong to him. Their voices cracked with anger, dust rising beneath their feet as the villagers gathered closer, whispering in fear. Children clung to their mothers. Young men murmured among themselves, waiting for a single command to strike. But Chike did not flinch. His shoulders sagged, his eyes lowered, and his breathing slowed. For the first time since he arrived, he looked like a man carrying a weight too heavy for one heart. Amara watched him carefully, and in that moment she realized something important. He wasn't afraid of being beaten. He was afraid of being understood. The village square became silent. Then Chike finally spoke. His voice was soft, almost too soft for the tense air around him. He lifted his head and revealed a truth no one expected. He said he wasn't a thief in the way they imagined. He hadn't stolen money. He hadn't stolen property. What he stole, he claimed, was something far more dangerous. He had stolen the truth. Piece by piece, the past spilled from his lips. Chike had once worked for a powerful man in the neighboring town, a man feared for his cruelty and greed. Chike uncovered secrets, illegal deals, hidden crimes, and dangerous plans. When he refused to stay silent, the man turned against him, framing him for theft and sending people after him. So Chike ran, not because he was guilty, but because he was hunted. The crowd gasped. The angry men growled in disbelief. They called him a liar, insisting that they were sent to bring him back. Tension cracked the air like thunder. But despite the accusations, Chike stood firm, his voice steady as he explained how he survived night after night, hiding from men who wanted him dead. Amara felt the world shift beneath her feet. She looked at the scar on Chike's forehead. She remembered the trembling in his hands. She remembered the loneliness in his eyes the day he arrived. And suddenly, every strange detail made perfect sense. The villagers turned to their leader, waiting for a decision. Should they protect Chike? Should they hand him over? Should they believe him? The stranger stepped forward, ready to drag him away. But before anyone could speak, something unexpected happened. A young boy ran into the square, out of breath, shouting words that silenced everyone. He claimed he saw men with weapons hiding near the forest path. They weren't from the village. They weren't from the market. They were the same men hunting Chike. And they were getting closer. A cold wind swept across the crowd. Amara's heart pounded, because she realized this wasn't just about a stranger anymore. Danger was coming for all of them. The village had survived many things: floods, famine, long seasons of heavy rain, but it had never faced the kind of danger now crawling toward its borders. The moment the young boy announced what he saw near the forest path, fear settled over Umuoko like a dark cloud. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Trouble had finally arrived, and it had come armed. The air thickened as the villagers gathered together, their voices rising in anxious whispers. Mothers hurried their children indoors. Elders exchanged tense glances. Even the men who accused Chike stepped back, suddenly wary of the bigger storm approaching. Amara stood frozen beneath the Udala tree, her heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear the murmurs around her. She watched Chike closely, his chest rising and falling in deep breaths, his eyes scanning the distant forest as though searching for shadows only he could recognize. Then it happened. The crisp evening silence broke, leaves rustled, branches snapped, and from the edge of the forest 3 dark figures emerged, moving with slow, heavy steps. Men dressed in black jackets, faces hard, eyes sharp, each one holding a weapon that glinted beneath the fallen sunlight. They weren't strangers. They were hunters, and Chike was their prey. The villagers scattered backward in fear, forming a trembling circle. Some covered their mouths, some held their children tight, some whispered prayers beneath hurried breaths. The men of Umuoko grabbed farm tools, cutlasses, sticks, anything that resembled strength. But even then, their hands shook. The armed men walked straight toward Chike. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply stepped forward, shoulders squared, as if accepting a fate he could no longer escape. But Amara saw something flicker in his eyes, a quiet apology, the kind that said he never intended to bring danger to their home. Amara felt her chest tighten. This was no longer just Chike's past. It was now their problem. One of the armed men raised his voice, demanding that Chike be handed over. The villagers remained silent, torn between fear and compassion. Chike lowered his head, ready to surrender for the sake of the village. But before he could take a single step, Amara moved. She walked across the trembling circle, her feet steady, her voice rising in a way even she didn't recognize. She stood between Chike and the armed men, her small frame casting a long, defiant shadow across the ground. For a village girl who once feared city noise, her courage now thundered louder than any weapon. The armed men glared at her, shocked at her boldness. But Amara didn't blink. Instead, she lifted her chin and declared that no man would be dragged from Umuoko without proof. Her voice shook, but her resolve was unbreakable. The villagers stirred, emboldened by her unexpected bravery. The tension grew. The armed men stepped forward. The villagers stepped back. But Amara did not move. Her heart hammered against her ribs, yet she stood her ground. Chike looked at her with disbelief, his eyes softening in a way she had never seen before. For the first time since he arrived, he felt something stronger than fear. Hope. But hope alone couldn't stop what came next, because from the forest shadows more men emerged, not 3. Not 4. 8. Suddenly, the entire village gasped. Danger had not just entered Umuoko, it had surrounded it. And the only person standing between the hunters and their target was Amara. When the truth broke open, she never imagined her courage would draw the attention of armed men, nor did she expect the entire village to hide behind her small frame. Yet there she stood, between danger and the stranger she barely knew, with fear clawing at her chest and determination burning in her eyes. Everything Amara had ever been, quiet, gentle, cautious, fell away in that moment. Something stronger rose in its place. The armed men advanced slowly, their footsteps pounding into the earth like dull drums. The villagers trembled behind farm tools that suddenly felt useless in their hands. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Chike reached forward, trying to pull Amara behind him, but she refused to move. Her stance remained solid, her chin lifted, her gaze locked on the men closing in. But the tension only deepened. One of the armed men stepped forward, pointing at Chike with the cold certainty of someone who had hunted for far too long. He said Chike had run for months. He said the truth didn't matter. He said the only thing that mattered was bringing him back, dead or alive. The villagers gasped. Chike lowered his head. Amara's heart cracked. For a moment, silence swallowed the square. Then Chike finally spoke, his voice shaking with a truth he had fought to bury. He confessed that he had not only witnessed the powerful man's crimes, he had recorded them, not with paper, not with memory, but with a hidden device. A device that held enough evidence to destroy the man who had hunted him. A device he had risked everything to protect. A device no one knew existed, and it was hidden in Umwoko. The crowd erupted. Shock, fear, betrayal, confusion. Every emotion collided in the air at once. The armed men stiffened, their eyes blazing. They demanded to know where the device was, but Chike refused to reveal its location. For the first time, his fear was replaced with resolve. He was done running. Amara watched him with new eyes, realizing that the weight he carried wasn't shame, it was purpose. He wasn't just a hunted man. He was the only one standing between justice and a monster who controlled entire towns with fear. But the armed men were not interested in justice. They lunged. Chaos exploded across the village square. Women screamed, men rushed forward, children scattered. Dust rose into the air as the villagers tried to form a protective wall around Amara and Chike, though fear weakened their steps. And then something happened that no one saw coming. Chike pushed Amara aside and stepped forward, not to surrender, but to protect. His body moved with surprising speed, knocking down the first armed man who reached for him. The villagers gasped again. Chike was no ordinary laborer. His reflexes, his stance, his balance, everything suggested training. Real training. The kind given to men who once wore uniforms. Amara's eyes widened as realization hit her like lightning. Chike had not just been an ordinary worker in the powerful man's household. He had once been a security officer, a trained one. And the men hunting him were not simple thugs. They were former colleagues. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone imagined. The fight escalated. Shouts echoed. Dust swirled. Chike fought fiercely, but he was outnumbered. One of the armed men raised his weapon toward him, and in that split second, Amara screamed. But before the weapon could fall, someone stepped out of the crowd, an elder. Ogbuefi Madu, the oldest man in Umwoko, respected by all, feared by many. He lifted his staff and slammed it against the ground. His voice thundered across the square, silencing both villagers and attackers. His next words froze everyone in place. He said he knew exactly where the device was, and he said the truth Chike had hidden was bigger than all of them. The moment Ogbuefi Madu stepped forward, staff in hand, the entire square froze. The armed men halted mid-movement. The villagers held their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. For years, the old man had served as the quiet backbone of Umwoko, a man who spoke only when necessary. So when his voice rose that evening, it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Ogbuefi Madu's eyes swept across the attackers, sharp despite his age. His staff trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the gravity of what he was about to confess. He said Chike had come to him the very night he arrived in Umwoko, exhausted, trembling, desperate, and clutching something he dared not show anyone else. A small device wrapped in cloth. A device containing evidence that could destroy a powerful man. A device that Ogbuefi Madu had hidden beneath the village shrine, buried under sacred stones no outsider would dare touch. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The villagers looked around in shock, realizing their peaceful home had unknowingly become the center of a war far larger than them. The armed men stiffened. Rage flared in their eyes. They demanded the device immediately. Their voices cracked with frustration. They were no longer hunting a man. They were hunting truth. Truth strong enough to burn their entire empire. Ogbuefi Madu refused. He said the device would only be released to the authorities from the capital, not to hired killers. The armed men stepped forward. The villagers stepped back. But Amara, she stepped closer. Her body trembled, but her spirit stood firm. The strangers ignored her bravery, focusing instead on reaching Ogbuefi Madu. But before they could move, Chike blocked their path again. Blood trickled from his lip, his breathing shallow, but his stance unbroken. He told them that the moment they touched the shrine, the entire village would rise. And for the first time, the villagers believed him. Men gripped their cutlasses tighter. Women held stones in their hands. Young boys picked up sticks. The fear that once choked them began to burn into courage. They were no longer protecting just Chike. They were protecting their home, their pride, their elders, and the truth now tied to their land. The leader of the attackers clicked his tongue, unimpressed. He lifted his weapon. Tension crackled. The villagers tensed. Amara's heart slammed against her chest. Chike braced himself for the blow. But then, a loud horn blasted through the air. Everyone turned toward the sound. From the far end of the dusty road, two vehicles rolled toward the village. Dust swirled beneath their tires. Lights flashed. Uniformed officers stepped out with confident strides, their presence swallowing the square with authority. The armed men's faces drained of color. They recognized the uniforms. The officers shouted orders, encircling the attackers with ease. Within moments, the men who once terrorized entire towns were disarmed, pinned to the ground, and dragged toward the waiting vehicles. The villagers erupted in relieved cries. Amara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Chike sank to his knees, overwhelmed. And Oguefi Madu finally smiled, a slow, tired smile. But the surprise wasn't over. One of the officers approached Chike and revealed something that stunned both him and the entire village. Chike had not been forgotten. He had been followed. Someone from the city, someone Chike once helped, had gone to the capital and reported everything. Investigators traced the evidence, confirmed its truth, and had been searching for Chike not to punish him, but to protect him. He was the key witness in a case that would topple the powerful man who hunted him. The device hidden beneath the shrine would now be the final proof. The dust had barely settled when the village woke to a morning unlike any other. The square, still smelling of sweat and smoke from the struggle, held a silence that felt more like reverence than relief. Men who had trembled with fear only hours before now walked with a strange new steadiness. Women pressed their palms to their chests as if protecting newly found courage. Children peered from behind doors, eyes wide with the kind of wonder that comes when a small world suddenly proves it can matter. This was the moment everyone would remember. The officers stayed long enough to gather statements and secure the scene, their formalities slow but thorough. They moved with the calm assurance of those who had been handed the final piece of a dangerous puzzle. When the lead investigator finally spoke in that plain, serious voice, his words traveled through the crowd like warm light. The device Chike carried was real. Its recordings had already begun to unmask a network of corruption that stretched far beyond the neighboring towns. Men in high places could no longer hide behind fear. The law in the capital had what it needed. A cheer rose, tentative at first, then louder, until the whole village answered it. People came forward to touch Chike's shoulder, to clasp Amara's hand, to press their faces close and murmur thanks. Ogbuefi Madu, his staff resting against one hip, watched quietly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a proud, private smile. The same children who had run from the square earlier now danced around the arrested men as if they had reclaimed a stolen toy. The investigator called Amara and Chike to the front of the gathering. He used the words every small village prays to hear: brave witness, civic courage, community protector. He thanked them both, publicly, carefully, as if his respect could stitch back everything the village had nearly lost. They were given small tokens. A certificate from the district, a photograph taken by the officer with the little camera he carried, and a promise that the case would be pursued to the highest office necessary. The camera flashed. Villagers who had only ever seen town officials from afar leaned forward as if to see themselves in the proof that justice could reach even them. But it was the private moments that mattered most. Chike looked at Amara like a man who had been given back more than his life. He had been given a reason to hope. He thanked her without words. A steady, grateful gaze that said he understood what she had risked. Amara felt the village's hands on her shoulders, and in that pressure she felt her small world expand. She had been the spark. The entire community had become the flame. In the days that followed, the news traveled beyond dirt roads. Investigators came and went. Officials from the capital visited to collect evidence. The powerful man whose crimes were recorded in that hidden device was named, indicted, and, over the next weeks, arrested in a case that drew reporters and officials from places Umuoko had never known existed. The names of cities that once felt like stories now mattered in the village's conversations. With each report that came back, the villagers' pride swelled. But the greatest change was quieter. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began to help each other again. A market stall reopened. Fields once ignored were tended with renewed care. Ogbuefi Madu organized watches at night, not out of fear, but to protect a future he now believed could be different. The women's cooperative Amara, later helped form, would become the symbol of that difference. Using funds pooled from grateful visitors and small grants brought by the investigator's office for community recovery, they built a simple workshop by the stream. There, girls learned to weave, to stitch, to turn scrap into goods that traders would buy. Amara taught not just craft, but confidence. How to bargain, how to keep records, how to stand when the world tried to look past them. Chike did not disappear, nor did he return to the life he had fled. The court offered him protection and a job with the investigative team, but when the time came to choose, he surprised everyone by choosing another path. He stayed in Umwoko, not because the village could shelter him from everything, but because he saw a place worth defending. He helped set up the cooperative security and taught the young men basic protection tactics so they would no longer be easy targets. In evenings, he sat with Ogbuefi Madu, learning the old stories and sharing his own in return. The village honored them both in a simple ceremony beneath the Udala tree. Children placed woven garlands around their necks. The elders presented a carved wooden cup of palm wine, raised not as a boast but as a pledge. We will protect our own. The police officer who'd first believed Chike pressed 2 small medals into Amara's and Chike's palms. Nothing flashy, just metal and ribbon, but heavy enough that every person there felt the weight of the moment. Amara's mother wept openly that night, not for shame or fear, but for relief and unexpected pride. She wrapped her arms around her daughter and whispered thanks in a voice cracked by joy. Amara's smile now carried a kind of quiet authority. She had tested the world and returned to build it better. Months later, travelers who came to buy the cooperative's crafts would ask for the story. Amara would tell it plainly. The city taught her temptation and quiet loneliness. The village taught her purpose and courage. Chike would add how running from the truth had nearly cost him everything, and how standing for it, even in a small clearing beneath an Udala tree, had saved more lives than he had believed possible. In the end, the shock the village felt was not because of violence or fame, but because ordinary lives had become extraordinary simply by refusing to look away. The final image that stayed with everyone was not of handcuffs or uniforms, but of Amara and Chike standing side by side at the cooperative's doorway. 2 figures in the golden light of a late afternoon, hands dusty from work, faces calm and steady. People leaned from their thresholds and watched them, not as saviors, but as neighbors who taught a whole place to be brave. And when the sun finally dipped behind the red soil, Amara whispered to no one but herself what she had learned. That testing the world might change you, but choosing to return and protect what you love can change the world. The village smiled back in agreement. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Your support helps me create more powerful stories like this. Thanks for watching.